Next, we have Rachel Gilmer. Rachel Gilmer is currently the co-director of the Dream Defenders, a human rights organization based in Florida who also works on issues pertaining to policing, criminalization, and detention. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, all of CODEPINK. It's really an honor to be here among so much courage and heart and wisdom. So in August, the Dream Defenders, along with 50 other organizations, released the Vision for Black Lives, a platform for Black liberation. And among the demands in the platform, we called for a divestment from the exorbitant amount of money in this country that is spent on war and military operations, and instead to invest those funds into the health, employment, and education of our communities. This is because we know and believe that there is a fundamental relationship between the oppression experienced by Black people living in the US and the oppression experienced by people around the world living under US empire. We are connected through legacies of white supremacy and imperialism and neoliberal policies that advance corporate power at the expense of our communities. The movement for Black Lives is an anti-war internationalist movement. We demand an end to the wars being waged in Iraq, throughout the Middle East, across the continent of Africa, in our own neighborhoods at home, and around the world. We demand a reinvestment in Black communities domestically and reparations for the endless death and destruction that our people and all working class people have experienced at the hands of the corporate war machine. We recognize that the state's decision to invest in mass incarceration and policing over programs that build the futures of Black people, like free public education, affordable housing, a federal jobs program, is directly tied to their same decision to invest in waging war and expanding US military presence abroad. The US government spends more resources criminalizing poor people, incarcerating poor people, paying corporations to destroy our communities, and then paying them again to build them back, than it does on actually creating policies and programs that advance our well-being. We demand an end to the profiteering off of our suffering, our death, and our destruction. The war in Iraq has led to the destabilization, first and foremost, of the Iraqi people, but it has also contributed to the destabilization of communities across the globe, including Black, brown, and working class people here in the US. Money that could be used to create jobs, build schools, and equip communities with the resources they need to thrive are instead being used to wage terror against our people here and around the world, all while fattening the wallets of US corporations. Each day, the US spends nearly $10 million in Iraq, totaling over $2 trillion since the start of the war, with no end in sight. In the years since September 11th and the establishment of the US-driven global war on terror, US military spending has increased 50%, with hundreds of billions of dollars having gone directly to private corporations. Each year, we spend 9 times more money on war than we do on education, and 20 times more than we do on Social Security and unemployment programs. This is a choice, and it must be named. This choice means that instead of providing education and job opportunities to young people, we are sending them off to war and waging war against them through invasion, occupation, policing, and incarceration. My partner Steve, like many in our generation, joined the military because he could not afford college. His historically Black college, Florida A&M University, saw major budgetary cuts under former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who was leading the war in Florida against public education, Black people, and the working class, while his brother was waging war in Afghanistan and Iraq. FAMU has also experienced major cuts federally under almost every presidential election and every presidential administration, including President Obama. These cuts have been targeted at HBCUs precisely because they are Black. As a result, his public university lacked a strong financial aid program, and his single mother couldn't afford to support him either. So my partner went to the military because he felt like it was his only path forward. Going to war felt like a better gamble than a guaranteed life of poverty. Steve's story is not an exception, but the rule of Iraq-era veterans. The government's decision not to invest in the lives of working class people, but instead in massive bailouts to Wall Street and major corporations, means that increasingly the working class, not the governing class, are sent to war. In fact, more poor people have gone and been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan than any wars prior. Working class people should not have to kill to make corporations richer just so they can pay for college and maybe get a good job. Since September 11th, 4 million people have been killed in the Middle East, civilians, 250,000 of which were killed in Iraq. In addition, the US has expanded Western colonial control over Africa in the name of fighting terrorism through the establishment of AFRICOM, killed thousands across the globe through the US drone policy, and increased militarization of our communities domestically through surveillance, increased policing, and mass incarceration. Private corporations like G4S have been contracted by the state to incarcerate Black people in the US, uphold apartheid in Palestine, guard Iraqi oil fields, and attack water protectors in defense of big oil and Standing Rock. We know our struggles are not exactly the same, but it should be very clear that we are fighting against the same systems. Today, we live in a society that always imagines itself at war with an ambiguous enemy that will always be there, so much so that we would rather spend resources killing people than building the futures of young people. The US war machine, just like the prison machine, runs on lies about who we are, what our problems are, and what solutions should be put forward to address these problems. It has created a culture of violence that presumes that Black and brown people are innately criminal and terrorists, that people ought to kill one another all the time, whether or not war is declared, and that death and incarceration are the only solutions to the problems we face. The war machine centers money-making over actual peacemaking. It turned Iraq into a fully privatized market, a playground for corporations to make money off of lies, invasion, death, occupation, and quote-unquote reconstruction of Iraqi communities. The post-9/11 war machine has boasted a culture in which corporations are openly profiting off the destruction of Black people and poor people. It happened in Iraq, it happened in Afghanistan, it happens at home, and we need to stop it. It's spreading. Throughout history, Black and brown people have bravely and brilliantly been the driving force, pushing the US towards the ideals it articulates but has never achieved. Today, we continue this legacy through courageously fighting to end the war against our people, repair harm, and attain the political and economic power necessary to determine our own destiny. We do this because we know another way is possible. The Black radical tradition calls on us to build a broad-based left agenda rooted in ending imperialism, white supremacy, and capitalism. We will not win if our only call to unite is to end the war. We must equally be invested in building Black, brown, and working class communities here. We need a clear call for reinvestment. This is an opportunity for our various movements to come together under a single agenda. This is a fight against neoliberalism. This is a poor people's movement against the uber rich, regardless of political party, that see us as collateral damage in their scheme to make billions. Donald Trump has at times presented himself as the anti-war, anti-interventionist, populist president for and by the people. It is clear that the neoliberal war-making of the Democratic Party is a total disaster. So instead, we have a fascist who claims to be against intervention. Trump has co-opted our language against intervention, even as we see arms companies' stocks rising since he became president-elect. This is really, really scary. We cannot let anti-war rhetoric be co-opted by a fascist. The only way we can defeat this fascism is by building a strong anti-war movement, one that sees wars being waged against our comrades around the world as connected to the wars being waged against working class people in the US, one that sees the expansion of policing and militarism against Black people, immigrants, and working class folks as in the US as connected to the expansion of military presence abroad. The time for status quo is over. An anti-war movement that does not engage Black people locally is not enough. And a Black liberation movement that is not loud and clear in its call to end imperialism is also not enough. This is not to say our struggles are exactly the same, again, but we recognize that we are struggling against the same systems and that we cannot break free from these systems if anyone around the world continues to suffer under them. So what will we do if Black Lives Matter is put on a terrorist watch list? What will we do if Trump follows through on his calls for mass deportations or the establishment of the Muslim registry? What are we all doing about Standing Rock? We live in the belly of the beast, and because of this, we bear a particular responsibility for what is happening around the world. There is no longer time to see our struggles in silos. We must work together to tear down US empire. There is no excuse. Global liberation depends on it. Thank you.